Good Sunday morning. So, wow, we've had a lot of stuff going on here. I was going to come on Wednesday, but I really got tied up. Um, I have to say, one of the things I said in the thumbnail here is, and I've been saying this for a while, we are seeing again the world change. The world's always changing. And, when we look back through history, this is nothing new. I mean, when you page back through the histories of humanity, there's always been exceedingly dynamic changes. In fact, if anybody's familiar with the Tartarian works, you talk about dynamic change. There's evidence that civilizations have come and gone, and epics have come and gone throughout this world. And it's interesting to look at the astronomy or astrology to see how this all fits in. And of course, right now, everybody is talking about Iran, and rightly so. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here. I mean, we got all kinds of stuff going on with radar and weaponry and things being detected and pushed around. And I can tell you, they're going to level Iran. That place, by the time it's done, there's not going to be much left in terms of anything militarily, etc. And it's interesting because I've been speaking a lot about Uranus with the Pleiades. And Uranus just entered the edge of the Pleiades again, because it's now direct, right exactly on May 2nd. Very, very close. And think about that. That's exactly when this whole situation with Iran unfolded. And also, I've been mentioning we had the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, of course, on the 20th of February. But on the 23rd, we entered into Kalisarpa yoga. And people may say, well, what does that mean? Well, that's where all the planets are in between the moon's eclipse points. And also, we've had a couple of very powerful eclipses, the new moon eclipse, and of course, the last full moon eclipse that we've been talking about. And these are all marker points in the sky. And when you look at all this, what does it really mean? Well, I think an old world order is fading away and a new one's coming in. Now, without getting political or talking about anybody, because I always get hate mail if I talk too much about politics or get into that whole genre. But I think at the top of the pyramid, we're seeing some very powerful banking and you could say control mechanisms on the Western civilization. It's interesting because when you look at Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, Ecuador, and the Panama Canal, all these things kind of bookend and dovetail together with what I'm seeing in the astronomy or astrology, right? Because you're seeing China and the New One World Order kind of get pushed back here. And one of the things that, there's something called the, what is it called? The DFC. And it is a insurance that's going to insure all the ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. Well, I mentioned a long time ago, damn good book here. It's called The Tower of Babel. And when we go back to Switzerland and you look at how not a shell casing ever fell on that place through any of the world wars, not one. And the Vatican either, right? Isn't that interesting? So when we look at who's really running this place and you look at how the money is doled out, I think we're seeing a massive shift here in direction of the world. And, again, I've always mentioned I've seen these marker points throughout history. And interestingly enough, it's always been the outer planets that have the most power. Again, just to review, just some of the recent stuff, right? 9/11 was a Saturn-Pluto opposition. The banks crashed on the square. COVID happened on the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And, there's overwhelming evidence now that not only did we have COVID, but there was all kinds of banking inflation planned as early as 2017. And I've always said these people are very aware of astrology. They know what's going on. They know these cycles. And it's interesting, people would say, well, are they timing this to the astrology or does the astrology just precipitate the events? It might be a little bit of both. So here we have another one. And we're seeing not only Iran be decimated. But we're also seeing something else. And the oil prices, by the way, I went to the gas pump here in California. Diesel fuel was over $6 a gallon. Premium is pushing 5. Regulars are like 4.5, and that's the cheap gas stations that I go by, right? If you go into the more expensive ones in the inner cities, oh my God, it's probably hitting $7 or more. So this is all being inflated, I think, artificially, because they're actually saying that the biggest deterrent is not the weaponry, hitting the tankers, even though that's happened, and I know that has happened. But the biggest thing was Lloyd's of London is the one who insures all these tankers going in and out of these journeys, right? Particularly in that Gulf area of Strait of Hormuz. Well, just turns out that now the United States and the Trump administration say, well, hey, don't worry about a thing. They won't insure it. We will. In fact, I'll play you this real brief clip with Scott Bessent.
DFC is going to provide up to $20 billion of ship finance. And Larry, as you said, the insurers over the weekend, when the conflict began, dropped all the insurance for any vessels going in and out of the Straits of Hormuz or generally around the Gulf.
See, so there you have it. And what's interesting is now we're looking at Cuba. This isn't just Iran. We're talking Venezuela, Cuba. We're talking, now down in Ecuador. And the Panama Canal has been pushed back from the Chinese. Plus, the London bankers are being pushed back out of insuring all the oil shipments. And, there's a lot of oil that goes through the Strait of Hormuz, but most countries are getting it from other sources. And I could tell you, they say there's, maybe 20% of the oil, and I could be wrong on that percentage, but approximately that going through the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, you got Saudi Arabia now can divert things to the other side of Saudi Arabia. So all this gas price inflation thing is a little bit, I think, artificial. And you're probably going to see this turn around. And I've had people asking me repeatedly, geez, Jeff, is this World War III? Is this the end? Is the end near? I get no. I get this is a time of exceedingly powerful transformation that's going on. And I think it's going on much more at the top of the pyramid from everything I can see. And remember, this Kalisarpa yoga, which means all the planets in between the nodes, is going to continue to go on all the way up until July. I get that this actually breaks July 9th. And Venus is the planet that will break it. Will actually cross the south node. So this is really and Kalisarpa yoga is just for anybody who doesn't know, that's where all the planets are in between the moon's eclipse points. Now, the only one that'll break it every 2 weeks is the moon going out and around, and Pluto's hanging outside of it. All the rest of the planets are on the inside. Now, if people listen to me and they'll say, well, but that's not in the classic text. It's not. When I say classic text, it's not in the classic Vedic texts like Brihat Horashastra and some of the more classic texts. But it has been definitely observed, I think, from everyone I've ever studied with. And these are some people who have had their families hand down astrology for several generations. And a lot of these guys aren't alive anymore. I know Chakrapani and I had talked about that. So it's clearly an energetic time of karmic acceleration. And this is exactly what we're seeing right now. Again, the world is changing. This has been, Iran's government has been in place ever since the Carter administration, 1979, transferring over to Reagan. I remember that vividly. And that was a big deal because what we've now seen that being used as an outlet for terrorism. And not to sound conspiratorial, they've actually found that Epstein and some of the evidence has been funneled through Iran. Always follow the money, you see. So this is what I think is going on, is that we're seeing a new direction coming in. And of course, a lot of people are very angry about this, and a lot of people are really happy. And I'm talking to people who've lived in Iran, who have relatives in Iran, who have friends in Iran, and they're happy. They're saying, the torture that went on, the brutality and the insanity was really heavy duty. In fact, I've heard reports that there may have been up to 50,000 people actually killed in this last protest. I could be wrong, but that's some rumors I've heard. You know what they say about rumors, don't you? They're usually true. So this has definitely been a major change. And the biggest one that I've been saying all along is Uranus, which every about 84 to 86 years goes around the chart, right? Goes around you could say the solar system. Well, again, May 2nd, Uranus is going to conjoin the fixed star, or we could just call it the star, Alcyon. And this is a big deal because many of the ancients treated that as a central point of spiritual emanation. And when I looked up the detailed descriptions of Alcyon, it's a very mystical star, and it has a lot to do, some say, with the afterlife, with transition between the physical world and the other world. Also, it has to do with ruthless judgment. So I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Because see, the stars, the fixed stars, which is they call the eighth sphere outside of the solar system, if you will, it really has a magical influence on this particular world. It's a very powerful spiritual influence. And I thought that was interesting. The other thing that's interesting about this is that it's in the lunar mansion called Critica. People say, what does that mean? Well, that's all about fire, transformation, and cutting. So it's a intense nakshatra. And for anybody who doesn't know, what a nakshatra is their lunar mansions that circle the earth. And there is such great secrets, many people have so many conspiracy theories about the moon, and I'm not so sure they're conspiracies. But the moon is a very mysterious little body. It only faces us one side all the way around, right? Pink Floyd did a little album about that was quite profound, called Dark Side of the Moon. Well, the mysteries of the moon, I think, go far deeper than anyone will ever fully realize. And one of my favorite things that I always talk about is the Kala chakra, what we call system. And you can actually see here's the infinite loop of time that many quantum physicists, theoretical physicists talk about, where time is an infinite loop. Wasn't this interesting? This is the lunar mansions called divisions, called Navamshas, that is in between the earth and the moon. See, Vedic astrologers call it the nakshatras. Why? Because nak just simply means sky, and shakra means map. That's all it means. So once you get past the terminology and you start assimilating, what the heck does it mean, right? That's where we want to get to. This demystifies it, and we start going, well, wait a minute. Okay, these ancients knew this was a map of the sky in the sidereal system between the moon and the earth. Another interesting thing is, where's the last place we leave when we come from the spiritual world into the physical? Mom's womb, which is indicative also of the moon. Isn't that interesting? So we've really got a time machine here and a reality machine. This is exceedingly complex. And just to give you an idea how complex it is, this is a little hard to see on the screen, but what this is this is a diagram of the direct and reverse zodiacs in the lunar mansions. So this is deep, deep stuff. And they even get into years. Look at this here. Each of these lunar mansions, like 808 years, 770 years, 794 years. So we get into the mysteries of, some of the things the Tartarians and other people mention, that, what happens? Why does these major changes in society? And of course, in the last 100 years, we've seen World War I, World War II, and of course, many people think we're in World War III, and a lot of other wars in between. But we have seen tremendous external changes in this world. I mean, when you look at, even in my life, and I've, just coming on 3/4 of a century here pretty soon. So when you look at the power of change in society, it never stops. This never, ever, ever stops until the fat or skinny lady sings, right? I canceled everybody. I don't want nobody singing at my funeral. But the bottom line is, it's profound when you look at the societal changes in comparison to the astronomy. And that's really what's going on. See, we got Mercury still retrograde. It's gone through the eye of the sun, and now Mercury goes direct on the 20th. And we got a new moon coming up on the 18th. So we got a new moon on the 18th of this month, March. And then we have Mercury stationing and going direct. We also have Jupiter going direct literally in 2 days. It goes direct on the 10th. So that's another powerful thing. So these things never stop, and astronomers and astrologers are always, talking about certain things going retrograde and direct. But the big picture, if you back this out to 100,000 feet or higher, if you will, and you start looking at what's really happening, you really got to look to the outer planets in juxtaposition to what everything else is doing. And I'd have to say, and I've mentioned this many, many times, Uranus, every time it crosses through this little star cluster called the Pleiades, which is actually very narrow. It's in the sidereal zodiac. I think it ranges from approximately, there's dispute on this, but like 3 degrees and some odd minutes of sidereal Taurus up to about almost the 7th degree, even though it's 6 and some change, if you will. So it's a very narrow little window of that sidereal pie slice in the sky. And again, it's not even a constellation. It's a star cluster called the Pleiades. And it's a lot of ancient lore about that. They often talk about the 7 sisters of the Pleiades, right? That's named after the 7 stars. There's many legends that talk about how these 7 stars were these incarnate beings brought up to that. There's a lot of legends, too, about stars, where certain biblical stories, certain people went up and became stars. A lot of little cartoons too I've seen about that. Pretty interesting stuff. So where we're at right now is powerful transformational change in the world. And I think this is going to continue to go on all the way up until July. Now, a lot of people are predicting the end of the world, aircraft carriers are going to get nuked and everything else. I don't see that. Now, I could be wrong, but I cast interrogations on that. I'm not seeing that. First off, I don't think anyone realizes just how sophisticated we have in terms of radar detection systems. You're not going to get close to it. They've got lasers, they've got directed energy weapons, a lot of stuff going on, and some very advanced weapons that no one's even heard of. And I know one of the things that the U.S. military has, just to speak of it, is the fact that they can generate so much power on all of these ships. There's where your lasers and your directed energy weapons are coming from. And you're not going to do that with a conventional diesel or fuel powered turbine. It's not going to happen. So we got some really powerful stuff here going on. And I really believe that they're taking out a channel of distribution of finances and hiding of finances and redirecting it. And I've been saying this, and I know a lot of people love Trump, a lot of people hate Trump. I'm not here. I don't want to get into that. And a lot of people are predicting he's going to have some really challenging things coming in, particularly this summer on his chart. And, I will say this is a time where regime change is going on, not just in Iran, but I think at the top of the pyramid of the banking system. I always quote, and I really always liked this guy. His name was Aaron Russo, and he had some great comments. He wrote a little documentary. He didn't write it, he actually filmed it. It was called From Freedom to Fascism. And he was talking about the tax systems and all the things. Of course, you can't find it anymore because they got rid of it. But he really said it best. And this is pretty simple.
The real problem is the banking industry and the bankers in this country. That's where the real problem lies. That's the root of our problem. That's why we've lost America.
And I think we lost it right after the Civil War, but we really lost it with the Federal Reserve Act. And, again, this is very deep and mysterious stuff. And not to get conspiratorial, but my take is we are seeing this alter. I'll never forget. It was in 1976. I was working on a carpentry crew, and a man named Wesley Pavlon was building a house on the crew for him. And he had owned the Milwaukee Bucks. Maybe people have heard of, Lou Alcindor and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And they had just won the championship. I think it was within a year or two of that. And this guy had more money than you could possibly imagine. He was a multi-millionaire. And he was a nice guy too. I actually had a tool in my hand, and he came up and he grabbed it on my hand and he stuck it in the ground. I thought, what's this guy going to do? And he said, this is real. And he said, all this money, he said, it's all manufactured. And he had a lot of knowledge about the upper echelons of the world. So he came from Russia, and an interesting guy. And long story short, he said he didn't think it was going to last much longer. And I've heard this story time and time and time again. Oh, everything's going to collapse. Everything's going to cave in, right? We saw this in 2008 and many other times, when we had major financial calamities and crashes. Well, in a lot of ways, the whole system is an electronic paper mache fiat currency system. And, this is way beyond my capability to explain all this. But I can tell you, if you ever want to read an interesting book that'll give you a little bit of history, it's pretty heavy. It's real history orientated. But when you boil it all down, the whole system is literally a floating crap game. And what I think we're seeing right now in the change of what is going on celestially with this Kalisarpa yoga, the Uranus over Pleiades, between now and this summer, I think we're going to see massive changes in the structures at the top of the pyramid that we probably won't hear about on the mind control news. And if I'm right, I don't think we're going to see World War III and the end of the world. I don't think that would even be allowed to be happen. And I noticed in the comments, somebody's asking, what about UFO disclosure? What about this kind of stuff? And I think there's a part of that behind the scenes. Again, I think if anybody has eyes to see, there's already a disclosure. I mean, if you look at some of the documentaries out there, The Age of Disclosure is just one of them. And I think I heard that director and producer are coming out with another one that's really going to be pretty amazing. But someone says it's all fake here. Well, I don't know if it's all fake, but it's certainly all a machine of society that's running. When you look at countries, it's really interesting how the founding forefathers were actually ingenious. They knew that a country was like a business. It was like a big gigantor corporation, if you will. And some of the things that are loopholes that the really wealthy know about is trusts and LLCs and all these things. And this is why you see the NGOs and all these things funding terrorism, funding this, funding that, funding political campaigns, all that. So this is a very complex system. And what I see here is that we're going to see a change of, again, more sovereignty in the United States and other nations. Europe is in big trouble. And, again, I'm really, this is very significant, even though it's just an insurance thing, right? Lloyd's of London and that thing I talked about earlier with the DFC, that I can tell you is huge, because it's just an external indicator of the massive changes that are happening in the societal structures of this country. And you're seeing, again, a new set of owners come in at the top of the pyramid and reestablish the United States. Now, I've read some astrologers have said they think it's the end. The United States is swirling to the bottom of the ocean. It's gonna crash. I think that attempt was done during the Pluto return of the United States the last 4 or 5 years. In fact, I talked a lot about this on podcasts. The United States birth chart had a Pluto return like 3 times. And it was all between 2021 and 2023. The exact dates I can't remember. And look what happened. And there's overwhelming evidence. I was going to play this clip, but I'm not going to because it's very long. I'll just paraphrase it. And essentially, they knew it literally as early as 2017, these banks were wrapping up, and they caused much of the inflation that had happened between 2020 and 2024. So like someone said there, it's all fake. I don't know if it's all fake. It's certainly real, but the manipulation or the illusions that are painted are oftentimes diversions that are fake. And very interesting stuff. Someone's mentioning here, there will be an arrest on March 14th. Yeah, that's interesting because on the 14th, we've got, see, the 13th and the 14th Mars is conjuncting the North Node, also known as Rahu. Western astrologers will call it the North Node or the head of the dragon. Vedic astrologers are going to call it Rahu. And they're right. It actually, between the 13th and 14th, I would not be surprised if we see some major events here coming through. Because, again, the planet of war in Mars is conjoining Rahu. And again, we'll see how that plays out. I do not get that this whole, scenario is going to bring us World War III. We are seeing right now on the news the constant, images flashing of conventional, and we're probably not seeing some of the high-tech secret weaponry. But I can tell you, I don't think China and Russia are going to step into this. They would have already. And yeah, we've heard reports Russia are going to, they're supplying information to Iran. Well, there's not much infrastructure in Iran left right now to supply information to. So yeah, they may get off a few more drones and a few more missiles here and there, but I don't think there's much left. I mean, those poor people, I just think of the civilians in Iran. I mean, I was watching a news clip this morning on how this guy's wiping oil off a car from the rain. In other words, the bombing of the refineries is putting so much fragmented oil in the air that, he's wiping oil off the car from just, it's raining oil. So, and you're breathing that stuff in. And that's a fire hazard right there too. So, yeah, we're taking out the regime, but the poor people who are civilians that are around this stuff, man, that's pretty tough. My heart goes out to them. But anyways, I do think, a lot of people are saying, oh, this is going to go on until September and, Trump is sold out and all this stuff. I don't think it's going to go on as long as people think. Here, I'm going to share my screen here. I think the firepower that's being used is absolutely formidable right now. And I'm going to share my screen here and just share a couple of charts here for you. And one of the things that is really powerful here. See, I actually put this up here. This is a little small on the screen, but this gives you a little picture of what it looks like over there right now. Of course, this is Iran right here where I'm circling. Here is Iraq. Here is Syria. Here is Jordan. And Israel's way over here on the edge of the Mediterranean, right? There's Cyprus. That's where the guy lived, the Magus Astrologist I talk about all the time. Well, this right here, what I'm tracing, is that Strait of Hormuz, which is right here, this little tiny curve here that goes through. So this is the bottleneck, if you will, out into the Indian Ocean or to the Gulf where the rest of the oil goes. So you can see clearly Kuwait, Baghdad, or you could say the whole country of Iraq, as well as, Dubai is right here next to the Strait of Hormuz. So this whole thing about, the ships can't sail, and sure, there's going to be danger, but I really think it's a power play on the finances at the top of the pyramid. And again, this insurance thing I just played with Scott Besson, I think really is telling. They're shoving the London bankers back out of the picture, and the United States is stepping up. And again, they're going to be doing the, I forget what they call it here. It's the DFC, whatever the abbreviations are, I don't know. But pretty interesting stuff because they're offering up to $20 billion in insurance for these things to go through. So, and it will start going through. I think the oil will start flowing again. And this is a political move that we're seeing. And of course, everyone's predicting the end of the financial, oh my God, this is going to cause everything to go up in the smoke. I don't see that. I think what we're likely to see is more things come up with Cuba, also the Ecuadorian situation, Venezuela, and reorient. What this really is, in my opinion, is an attempt to reestablish the petrodollar. That's what's going on, in my opinion, from what I can see. Because I always take logic over here, right, on the left side, and then look at, okay, what's the astrology saying? And then, most importantly, I look at interrogations. Interrogations are the key. And to me, I have never found, you can sit there and look at astrology upside down, all the way around, and come to conclusions of what you think aspects and so on and so forth mean. But there's nothing as powerful as interrogation and prashna. It's one of the oldest types of astrology. You can see this is the question right here. Will World War III happen or evolution happen? Well, notice Pluto's right at the top of the midheaven. And it is clearly, Pluto is, it's ironic. The astronomers make the smallest planet in the solar system insignificant, and yet it seems to show up in mundane astrology as one of the most powerful indicators. Again, I rattled off earlier, World War I started on a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That's when the Federal Reserve came in. We could go back through history and look at the conjunctions of the major outer planets. They're always indicating major issues in the world. Absolutely amazing. So you can see in this interrogation here, Pluto's right at the midheaven. But what's most importantly is Venus just by minutes of arc separated from the conjunction of the Lord of the 10th. So to me, I'm not seeing this. I'm not seeing this. I'm not seeing a World War III scenario here. Yes, we've got Mars conjuncting Rahu. We might see some flare-ups here and there. But overall, you've got a coalition here really arming in the entire Middle East that's forming and going with Israel and the United States. So, I mean, and there's all kinds of conspiracies. Israel's making Trump do it. It might have been the other way around, as he said. Again, I can't say too much good about Trump. I'll get hate mail. But anyways, really powerful stuff. I want to show you, as long as I've got the chart up here, this is the chart of Iran here. And people could see this. I had mentioned this on a previous podcast. This is Iran's chart on the inner box here. The outer is the transits right now. And notice the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is right over the leader of Iran, who doesn't exist anymore. And of course, the leader is always the sun. That's the general significator. And you got Saturn, Neptune right over that whole thing. Plus, you've got K2, which is the moon south node joining Saturn. K2 and Saturn are always an indication of major disillusion, or you could say liberation from karma. And I can say I think these guys definitely got liberated from karma. And also Mars was over K2 as well. So clearly some very powerful things. Another thing I noted too is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction actually happened when it was exact, pretty close to Iran by location astrology. I thought that was kind of interesting too, just a little point of interest here. So interesting stuff to note. I'll stop sharing the screen here. And again, a lot of energies in the sky right now. And this is a very, very dynamic time. And I think we're going to see the focus also turn towards Cuba. Cuba's being squeezed off right now. Again, this whole axis here of Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, Ecuador, and other like Panama Canal, all this stuff, really interesting how it's shoving back and reestablishing the USD, the United States dollar, the petrodollar. And if anybody remembers back in the 90s when George H. Bush was in, not the shrub, but the father. And it was quite interesting because it was exposed how much Saudi Arabia was holding in our treasury bonds and all the finances back and forth. This is all about the money. So powerful, powerful times right here. So it's a lot of great comments here. So yeah, a lot of people are mentioning a lot of good comments here. So somebody's mentioning the 2030 plans. Yeah, see, again, when we look at the outer planets, I'm really seeing here in 228, we've got the Saturn-Pluto square. See, that's the first square since COVID. And that's more likely when we're going to see, again, major shifts. But the past never equals the future. And what's interesting about this is that, a lot of people are mentioning Bush Sr. here. The Saudis just locked up Iran's money, you bet. So this is all about the money, let me tell you. And I can tell you, if anybody who has eyes to see, there's a lot of articles out there about how Epstein and Obama and Clinton and many others were funneling stuff through Iran. So, when you want to get into Ukraine, right, that's another whole quagmire. But it's always about the money. And, George Carlin might have been right. He said, war is when old men in business suits spend young people off to war for their business interests. And some wars are, you could say, just, or we have to defend ourselves. But a lot of them are shifting the powers and the structures that are out there. And I think we're seeing this right now. I think you're going to see oil come back on the scene here as being very powerful. We could see Iraq start to light up finally after 23 years. We could also see Saudi Arabia get much bigger in the game. So a lot of stuff is going on here. A lot of people say it's pumped out. I don't believe that. Again, it's all about the money and the oil and the energy. So, I really believe COVID was a massive attempt to bankrupt the entire Western systems and turn it into basically an automatonic society where everyone is microchipped and dependent. And it didn't work. And they did a number on us, I'll say that, but it didn't work. So, someone's saying here, I think it's 2027 new because COVID came 3 years earlier than they thought. Well, you might be right about that. But I know there's all kinds of things that could rear its head too. I'm hearing a lot of, little outbreaks of diseases. This always happens. But we are in a Kalisarpa yoga all the way up until July 9th of this year. And I'll be talking more about that. But it's very powerful because every 2 weeks, that moon will swing out and break the Kalisarpa yoga. Then it goes back in behind all the planets behind the node. The only one that stays out there is Pluto. And isn't that interesting? Pluto rules transformation, change. One good analogy for me for Pluto is if you took a coin and you threw it in a crucible and you heated it and melted it down, it will still be silver or gold or whatever you're melting, but it changes its nature. It now becomes something else. And that's a really good analogy to Pluto. And it's interesting how that's outside of this Kalisarpa yoga all the way up until July. So pretty interesting stuff. So yeah, someone's saying Obama has to keep TDS alive. He's worried. Well, it's not Obama. I can tell you, it's the boys at the top of the pyramid. These are just the foot soldiers. What's mentioned in another book I mentioned called The Great Taking by David Webb. What a great book. You can get that for free online. Just go to davidwebb.com. The Great Taking. Just Google it. You'll find it. And he mentions in there how he knows George Soros. He knew him very well. It worked in hedge funds. And he said, this was back in the 90s. And George Soros used to say to him all the time, you have no idea how powerful these guys are at the top of the pyramid. Well, they are. They've reshaped society. I mean, when you look at the Rothschilds and all this that's going on in the Rockefellers, they have been really behind the educational systems, the whole mind control, new version of society. Remember, it's not Leave It to Beaver anymore, is it? It's a whole nother world. And you can see the fabric of society altered and changed through the media, the shows, the television shows, the newscasting, the comedy shows, all that. So pay no attention to what you hear and only a portion of what you see, and you might be okay. But clearly, we are always in a mind control system. And the most important thing I always say is pay attention to your own spiritual sense of self, because that's really the only thing we have direct control over, that and the reaction. And when you look back through history and society, it's always been insane. It's always been some despot trying to do this or control that or do what have you. It's just on a much bigger, more sophisticated scale now because of where the world's at. And again, if it's true, we go around the central sun about every 26,000 years. It's actually a little less, 25,900 or 700 or whatever they say. You can get a lot of realities going on in that amount of time. So anyways, I'm going to keep this one a bit short today. I'll answer a couple of questions here if we got it on here. Someone's saying here, post due aid to Cuba. I don't know what that means, but yeah, I think we're actually seeing, again, another situation of communism or very deep socialism being crushed so that it can be freed and shoved out. Again, this is very, very powerful what's been happening. And again, I've been saying we have a war between the globalists and the nationalists. And it appeals to a lot of people, this whole globalism thing. Oh, we're all going to be in love and light. Well, I saw a good post about prison. In prison, you get free food, right? You get, you don't have to worry about anything because, everything's outside of you. And of course, a few other things. But, it's capitalism may not be perfect, but at least in America, I can get in a car and drive across this country and not have them say, "Where's your papers, please?" So if you go to other countries, you find out America is pretty amazing. And, I'm not going to get into all this other stuff about nation building, but I think we're seeing a shove back. And this is the nature of Uranus every time it goes through the Pleiades. The last time this happened was World War II. So I forget the exact, whether it was at the beginning, the middle, or the end of World War II. I think it was near the beginning. And these always bring major changes and disruption and rebellion against, tyranny. So however you want to determine that. And that's the tricky part today, is who in what is the tyranny. There's so many viewpoints, it's almost impossible to unravel until you sit back and stop listening and just rationalize. So pretty interesting stuff. So so someone says, I don't have to like someone and I can still tell the truth, unlike so many others. You bet. All of us can if we really pay attention to it. Yeah. So a lot of great comments here. A lot of people are mentioning about some of the podcasts that take you through the money receipts. You bet. It's all about the money. And it really is. And it always has been. I mean, when you go back and you even look at the kingdoms and the monarchies, they were doing the same thing. They were suppressing the people, taxing the crap out of them so they could fund their whatever wars they were doing or controls. It's just the same thing on a different scale. So yeah, I can tell you here. Yeah, someone's saying here, remember the 400 million in cash? Yeah, Obama gave to Iran. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, pallets of cash. And this whole thing with Iraq too, back 23 years ago now, was another power play that we saw, and some of that might have been over portals too. There's a lot of mystical stuff that's going on this planet, and it's really a war between good and evil when you really look at it. There's a lot of portals, is what they talk about, where people actually can move in and out of time and space. And this stuff may sound crazy to some people, but I'm telling you, check it out, because there's a lot more going on than we know. I always mention Admiral Byrd, who was funded to go down into Antarctica, huge operations. And many people have talked about the ice walls they see down there and a whole civilization down underneath that had brought Byrd down. And a lot of these scientists were just dumbfounded. They saw all kinds of crazy stuff, which was pretty wild. So there's a lot more going on this planet than we know. And I do think with this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, we are going to see a new reality come in. And I think, the empire is going to try and strike back here, particularly late spring into summer. But I don't know that I see any horrible, again, World War III from the interrogation I'm looking at. And let's hope that's right, because we certainly don't want to see that. And again, it's great that, this is being stopped in Iran, but to the people living in Iran, you take a little kid or somebody who's got that kind of weaponry going off around them. It's pretty intense, man. And I'll tell you what, so I think it's going to taper off fairly soon. I got about 3 weeks. It's going to really drop off. And we've only been, less than a week here now. So give it time. And I think this will all turn around. And again, we'll see where it goes. But that's my take on it here. I'm just looking at some more of the comments here. I was just able to get on. And should we worry about any attacks on the home front? Yeah, I did get. And I've heard, and we've already heard, there's been attacks in Austin and other places of the country, New York, different places, Florida. We're going to see it. The interrogation that I got last podcast that I did last Sunday is definitely, we are going to see some flare-ups here. Is it going to be the level of a 9/11 or an Oklahoma bombing? Probably not. But I do think we're going to see a lot of flare-ups. And the other thing is they're detecting a lot of these NGOs. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. So, and I also think part of what we're going to see here in the United States is some more prosecutions, even though people, always roll their eyes and say, well, nobody ever gets held accountable. Don't be surprised if we do, because I think that, yeah, someone's mentioning Obama here again. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, clearly, when you look at these presidents and you look at these players in the game, they're cogs in the wheel. In my opinion, the real power corridors are at the top of the pyramid with the money. And it's really the bankers at the very, very top. And, we hear about BlackRock, which is huge, Vanguard and State Street and all these other webs that come down into the control systems of society's major players. And there's no question that's there. But it's really at the top of the pyramid. The agendas at the very top of the pyramid and the bankers. And I think there's a war, and there always has been a war going on at that top pyramid of directions of where money flow is going. And we're seeing it being shifted now. And again, I don't want to get into TDS here, but I think the direction the United States is heading in general, opening up its reserves and its oil and energy systems and getting rid of the red tape. I always mention Cloward and Pliven. They said, if you want to destroy a democracy, or you could say a capitalistic society, the first thing you do is create so much red tape, can't get anything done. Second thing you do is uncontrollable debt. And the third thing you do is uncontrollable immigration. This is clearly what's happened. And, again, I'm all for, foreign people coming in and all that. But we have seen what's happened in Europe and the countries of Europe, Germany and the UK particularly, and many of these other countries. I know Italy has shoved back a lot of things with the prime minister over there. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Yeah, and someone's saying, yes, COVID changed the money around in San Diego. They gave millions to, yeah, they did. I mean, this was set up. There's no question about it. And again, I could have played the clip. There is so much evidence with COVID that wasn't just a pandemic. It was also a planned operative to bankrupt Western society. And again, start at the top of the pyramid. And this is where it was going. And again, the astrology is what's so interesting about this. Whether you believe in astrology or you don't, that's what really is amazing. And again, I remember I was on Coast to Coast many years ago. It was back in like 2012. Jeff, what do you think of the Mayan calendar? I said, not a single thing. I said, I can't come up with anything. I said, watch out for 220 forward. Why? It was a Saturn Pluto conjunction. Very simple. And then we also had a Kalisarpa yoga during that whole interim, the very first part of the, COVID. And if we all page back in our minds, I mean, it was crazy back then. Put your face diaper on and head out, and don't touch anything, right? I mean, I remember driving around, out here in California in the sunshine with no mask on a motorcycle, watching everyone in their, Range Rovers with their masks on. And I'm going, okay, I got by just fine. But the sunlight probably did the best thing for us. So a lot of fun stuff here. So I got to keep this one a little bit short today, and I'll try and be more frequent. And I have some good podcasts coming out real soon here. One with Peter Crone that's coming up. That'll be a lot of fun. And he, again, talks a lot about consciousness. And I love that stuff because that's what I love to talk about. With all this astrology and all the world going on, there's one place we have to keep focus, and that's inside, or you could say in our sphere of reality. Our conscious minds are the most powerful thing we own. Like I always said, Edgar Cayce said, astrology is exceedingly powerful. The water levels are right here, but we're above it. And that's sometimes not easy to remember. I can say that for myself. And I've seen some horrible accidents during this Mercury retrograde, some really bad ones on the freeway. So drive careful until Mercury goes direct. And again, great time to back up your data, retrace, rethink. Actually, Mercury is now through the eye of the sun. So that's called combustion. There's three phases to Mercury retrograde. The first one is the occidental phase, where it goes retrograde and goes into the sun, which it's already done that. Now it's on the other side of the sun, and it's going to its elongated point. It's called its most oriental point, where it stations and then goes direct. So that'll be right on the 20th. So even though we've got, different aspects being made, it's a cycle of life. Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year, and it's been doing it for as long as history can report. It's been a long, long time. So with that, I'm probably going to close. Again, some wonderful comments here. I wish I could get into it. A lot of good stuff here. Where can I sign up for astrological reading? Oh, the best way to get involved with a reading with me is jeff@jeffharman.com. And that's HARMAN.com. And it's always good to email, because then, she'll get right back to you. So we schedule it. So, but yeah, I really appreciate all these comments here, and looking behind the curtain and the spot a bunch of evil magicians. Yeah, you bet. I'm telling you, really, when you really go down the rabbit hole, especially some of the stuff that's come out on the Epstein things. Epstein wasn't just doing the sexual stuff, which was horrible, to be sure, and all this other horrible stuff. But there was a lot of stuff going on here with experimentation and cloning and trying to download consciousness, all this thing, that we've heard about. There's a lot out there. And I always kind of laugh at that, because the only thing you'll end up with if you try and clone someone and download their consciousness is a machine that acts like you. We are not machines. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And proof of that is the overwhelming stuff I always talk about in 30 Years Among the Dead and many of these other books, the Sharia Gogam, which really proves, in my opinion, that we do not die. We're only sojourners here. And this lower conscious mind is really kind of a myopic place, if you will, that we interface with this dense physical world. And our third eye chakra is really the antenna that they've sought to calcify the pineal gland, so that connection is not there. So it's a lot of stuff about the pineal gland, as well as our conscious awareness around us. Many little kids are very intuitive. They see ghosts, they see people, they see things, and a lot of people too that are very intuitive. I always mention about the wonderful lady we had on, Laura Hirsch, with her son Trevor, on how these autistic children are showing immense telepathic capabilities. They're able to talk to deceased relatives, to animals, and they meet on the hill and they speak about, you can check out that podcast we did a while back. Very, in my opinion, proves we are not these lower conscious minds paying the bills, paying the taxes, doing this, dealing with all the stuff of life every day and the wars and everything else. We're really sojourners here for a very short time. And that's hard to remember, because that's what drives us all insane, is this lower mundane world without really backing out of it and stop being so emotionally reactive to everything. Because we're always going to get roller coaster rides. You're going to get people who are going to be jerks to you, nice to you, and all points in between, right? So it's our reaction that really matters. And I was just working with my son on a car, and actually it was on his motorcycle, and he was so angry. And I said, you know what? I said, that's not going to fix it. Walk away. And when we're young, we always get angry at things, right? But it's our emotions and our reaction that is such a powerful thing. I always mention that little diagram, which is absolutely amazing, which shows, that division between the so-called conscious mind and subconscious mind. And we are so rooted down here in this myopic world of time and space. And it's very real. We got to pay attention to what we're doing. We can't walk in the walls, and you got to pay attention to what you're doing and whatever, you're doing, operating a car or just dealing with life, right? It's not easy. And health is such a big issue. But we always got to back out and remember, it's our reaction to things that's the true, real power. And it really, really is. So someone saying, is Trump safe? I'm going to look at that more and more, he does have a lot of outer planet transits going on to him. And many people are predicting, oh, he's going to get killed. He's not going to complete his term. I have to say, the little bit I've looked at it, I think he's going to complete his term. In fact, I'd actually be surprised if we don't see some more things coming out that I'm not going to mention right now. But pretty interesting stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that's a lot of people are asking about Trump because many astrologers are out there saying his chart has a lot of outer planet transits to it, and it does. And again, remember, right back in 2024, I had said Trump literally had the bullets flying past his head, and one hit him right when Uranus and Mars crossed his midheaven. Almost, it was literally to the minute almost. It was so accurate, it was creepy. And of course, the first time Uranus hit his midheaven, he had the verdict read in a courtroom on those charges against him. The second time, the bullets flew past his head. The third time, he won the presidency of the United States. So he's going to have Jupiter crossing his ascendant this summer. It's actually late in this year. And that's where sidereal Jupiter will cross into Leo, which is his ascendant. That's always a good omen. And that counteracts a lot of these things people are seeing. But I don't want to comment too much on that because I definitely would want to take a deeper look. And I haven't really focused on Trump's chart as much as I would like to comment on something like that. So someone saying America is at 250-year point like Rome when it fell. That's exactly right. But you got to remember, Pluto takes between 240 something years to 250 years. And typically there's been a lot of research done on that. Empires tend to fall, rise and fall at 250-year increments. And that is you could say, synodic cycle of Pluto. Again, the word synodic cycle just means how long does it take to go around the solar system. And, there's no question. We saw America go through literally almost complete destruction here during the Biden administration. And we did. I mean, when you look at the debt and you look at that's when we leapt from, I forget what the trillions of dollars was, but we probably over doubled our national debt during that whole period. And also the borders were flooded and so many other things happened here that I think are being unwound right now. And even though it's not perfect, and a lot of people I've talked to a lot of people who love Trump, and some are upset. They're worried about Peter Thiel, and the AI thing could be very dangerous down the line. And I agree with that. But, nothing's perfect. But I still say divinity always sends down into creation fail safes so that it doesn't get completely destroyed. I always mention that the Vedas, which are a profound set of texts, if anybody's ever poked around in them, they're obscure, but they're really profound. And it actually talks about how divinity, or God, or whatever you want to say, destroys the universes, all of them, every 4.3 to 4.6 billion years. But yet, just like the infinite loop of time in the Kalisarpa dosha, it keeps on going. Creation never stops. And you've got to remember, time, a lot of people say time's an illusion. Well, I wouldn't say it's an illusion. It's a pretty real reality that we're in here. But yet, on the other hand, they're right. Theoretical physicists, quantum physicists talk about this all the time, and they're absolutely right. Time, if you and I didn't have sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight, no matter where we are on this globe or planet, if you're a flat earther, or plane, the bottom line is we would lose all reference to time. So the celestial matrix, which is what I would call astronomy or astrology, is clearly the timing of our reality structure, and it's interacting with each one of us, I think, completely unique. This is why no two people will ever experience an exact progression, transit, dosha, or Kalashakra dosha the same way, because we're all unique. We're all individual beings attached to our soul roots, which is very, very complex and way, way, way beyond astrology. I'm always amazed at the Kala Chakra dosha system. Kala means time, chakra means the wheel of time. And it is this really ancient, again, I put it back on the screen, the reverse, that what you see up here, which is gray, is the reverse karmic release of karma. And this down here is the direct. And I've seen this in people's lives when they move from the reverse karma point to the direct, or the direct to the reverse. And those are called quantum jumps, or they call them lion's leaps. And then you have horse steps, which are short little jerks back and forth. And it's stunning, because people will say, yeah, but that's when so-and-so did this, or, that's when this happened to my, yeah, well, I know. That's exactly what the chart said. So we're always looking at reality through the lens of what happens to us through people, places, situations, legal things, etc. But isn't it interesting how they show up right on? It's just like, oh yeah, well, COVID happened in 2020. Well, yeah, that's right, when the Saturn-Pluto conjunction happened. Exactly. We watch the buildings come down like sparklers from jet fuel right when the Saturn-Pluto opposition in the Pentagon get hit, right? And so, these things always show up from mundane sources that, we would treat as our reality structures. But when you back out of it and you look at it, you go, wow, that really coincided with the celestial phenomena we call astrology or astronomy. It's so accurate, it's creepy. This is exactly what our forefathers knew. And, very interesting stuff. I always mention Benjamin Franklin. He had the Poor Richard's Almanac. He was really into astrology. And, again, the mystical experiences that George Washington had, which was really, really interesting. And you look at the symbolism in the United States with the 72 bricks, and then the capstone up above, the all-seeing eye, right? The sheaves, the 13 laurel leaves, the 13 arrows, and all these mystical symbols that are in look at the pentagon. You know what that is? It's a pentagram, right? So just with the tips cut off, if you look at the building. So if you think these guys aren't into esoteric symbolism and NASA isn't, I got news for you. Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, and Aleister Crowley were all together when the JPL, the start of NASA, all came together. So there's clearly a very long, winding road here that goes on between the divine and the demonic that is played out through these so-called elites at the top of the pyramid. A lot of deep stuff. And of course, we're getting a little bit of a taste of that with Mr. Epstein's files being released. And even though they're obscuring so much stuff and hiding all the powerful people they want to protect, it's still there for those who have eyes to see. With that, I've got to run. And, I just thought I would cover a little bit of the crazy mundane stuff that, goes on, and also correlate that to keep your center, and Mercury will go direct soon. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.